Hey y'all, Scott here. Put on your 3D glasses right now because I'm about to be as realistic as ever. I'm never gonna be truly happy. 3D, making old things new again. Out of all the gimmicks to warrant re-releasing old stuff, 3D is definitely fairly compelling. I mean, it's an entirely new way to experience something. But at the end of the day, that's all it is to many. A gimmick. In some instances, 3D isn't an unnecessary gimmick, it's also expensive too. Nevertheless, some products are enhanced because of the pop-out sync-in effects. They add a level of depth that, if done properly, can truly immerse you in that ordeal. While movies are the most common use for multiple Ds, video games seemed like a no-brainer. Sony really leaned hard into the whole thing, with many PlayStation 3 titles supporting the cause. But I want old shit in 3D, not good shit. See, that's where Nintendo steps in. They've been one of the most consistent supporters of stereoscopic 3D. They had a headset for the Famicom, tested it out with the GameCube, f***ed up with the Virtual Boy, and created an entire handheld surrounding the technology. The Nintendo 3DS was released in early 2011 featuring a glasses-free 3D display. I can't see anything. Every game supported 3D for the majority of its life, but that was a big deal, and it wasn't a big deal. $250? I can get surgery for that price. I never said it was quality. I mean, the 3D worked, but no game really made you go, I get it. The effect was merely cool, but you'd inevitably pass it up after a while to just go back to normal 2D visuals, pretty much how everything else 3D worked. So how do you convey what 3D can do to enhance your gaming experience? You make good games that use it properly, or you re-release Excitebike. Wow, I wonder what Nintendo will do. In the early days of the Nintendo 3DS, Nintendo announced a new line of titles, dubbed the 3D Classic Series. Retro games remastered with 3D in mind, released exclusively on the Nintendo 3DS eShop throughout 2011 and 2012 for roughly 5 to 7 bones a pop. This is such a cool idea. Imagine the possibilities. This line can truly go on forever. They can include some of the greatest games of all time. I love this company! Remakes were Nintendo's answer to validating 3D in the 3DS's early days. Ocarina of Time 3D, Star Fox 64 3D. What better way to show how it can enhance something than by using it with something we all know inside and out? But these games were already 3D in terms of polygons. How do you take a 2D game and convert that to scopic stereos? Well, Nintendo knew exactly who to get on the phone. Eureka! They made Endless Ocean and Dr. Mario Express. No shit, they know what they're doing. With that, development of the 3D Classics line kicked off all the way back in 2009, which 2 years seems like an extraordinary amount of development time for that. I guess it just goes to show what seems like the easiest things to make in the game industry, well, they can often be the toughest. Bringing a game over to a new platform, yet most assume there was an Amazon Dash button for that. In reality, it's a ton of work, and these 3D classics were a similar story. They had to rebuild these retro games from the ground up, while also taking how they would work in 3D into consideration now. The results? Well, let's check out the first game of the lineup, 3D Classics Excitebike. This was initially seen at E3 2010 amongst 17 other classic games showcased in a demo titled Classic Games. Mario Brothers, Super Mario Brothers, The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, Punch-Out, NES Open Tournament Golf, Kirby's Adventure, Tennis, The Mysterious Murasame Castle, TwinBee, Kid Icarus, Urban Champion, Mega Man 2, Castlevania, Smash Ping Pong, Super Mario World, and Yoshi's Island were showcased in addition to Excitebike, all with a 3D effect. Now, these weren't playable demos, it was merely just showing the games running in 3D. The background usually just kinda sunk in, but considering nearly all the 3D Classics titles were a part of this demo may imply that these were being considered for the series as well. In fact, the 3D Classics developers outright stated Tennis for NES was being worked on in the series, but it was scrapped due to just not being that appealing in 3D. Maybe because it just wasn't that appealing in general. Regardless, 3D Classics Excitebike was made available right at the Nintendo 3DS's eShop launch, which occurred on June 6th, 2011. And for the first month, it was completely free to download as a way to thank 3DS users for putting up with the fact that eShop wasn't available until 4 months after they got their damn systems. The 3DS was released in an incomplete and overpriced state, but they gave me Excitebike for free, bitches! In actuality, I was one of the schmucks who waited until August 2011 to buy their 3DS when the price dropped from $250 to $170. That was quite the discount, but because of that, I missed out on the 3DS Ambassador program, which gave those who bought the system for $250 before August 10 free downloadable NES games valued at $5 a piece, 10 free downloadable Game Boy Advance games valued at $7 a piece, and I missed out on free Excitebike and had to buy it for $6. Did I save money or not? It's been a while since I used the 3D effect on a 3DS. I used to go all in with this sucker, full 3D to the max. Christ, it's just the title screen, and this is one of the most loud 3D effects in the 3DS library. It's just so 3D. That's probably because not only can you use the 3D slider to adjust the intensity, there's in-game 3D controls too, so you can gouge your eyes out, but you can gouge your eyes out just just a little bit more. Go the extra mile. Interestingly, 3D Classic's Excitebike has the entire background change perspective with the adjustment of the 3D slider. Like, you literally see more of it when it cranks up. Most of the time, adjusting the slider in 3DS games just feels like adjusting the audio's volume, you know? It just increases or decreases the 3D effect, nothing major. This title, it literally moves the background further and further within the game, which is really cool. It's a level of control I never associated with the 3D slider, but it's here. The game itself, it's Excitebike. Don't look. This is an undeniably nearly flawless recreation of the original NES game from 1985, though now it's in widescreen with a few other graphical improvements. Certain obstacles are rendered in 3D now, and it all runs so much smoother. You have analog control, meaning you can pop a wheelie, or just kind of pop a wheelie. It all adds up to the game having a much smoother feel than ever before. However, the game having these 3D obstacles, well, they're only really in 3D when the 3D slider is on. What the developers did was fundamentally make the game exactly like the 2D original when the slider is down all the way, but when you crank it up more and more, it strays farther and farther. It's really bizarre. Some scenes, specifically the menus, are still in a pseudo 4x3 letterbox, which is strange considering these were remade from scratch. They didn't have to be constrained to 4x3, but they chose to, and they chose to do it with the easiest part of the game to make widescreen. Like, wouldn't the actual game be the hardest to turn widescreen in this menu with a one color background? Couldn't that be done during a lunch break? I don't care. I mean, it looks fine. It's not like they kept black bars there. They spruced it up. It's just confusing to me. The biggest upgrade, though, has to be the track editor. Excitebike infamously had a track editor that was a bit of a nightmare to use, and as a bonus, was pointless. You couldn't save your tracks. It gave you the option to save, but that just meant for as long as your game was turned on, because when you turn it off, I got pissed for you. 3D Classic's Excitebike gives you numerous slots to save multiple tracks to. The interface has been completely revamped in such a smart way, where you can shift through parts more elegantly. However, if you still want to use the editor in the style of the original, you have that option. At the end of the day, this is the definitive version of Excitebike in my opinion, and that's not even taking the 3D effect into consideration. With it is no contest. This is the way to play Excitebike. It's a fun arcade style NES game about making jumps properly to get the best time, and now it's more realistic than ever. This title set the standard for what I expected out of the 3D Classics line from that point forward, and taking all those games Nintendo demoed at E3 2010 into consideration, I was excited. Like, come on, Super Mario World, Zelda, Mega Man 2? So many possibilities! How about Xevious, you dumb bitch? This launched right alongside 3D Classic's Excitebike in Japan on June 7th, but everywhere else, we got it a month later on July 21st. I remember Xevious. I had it on one of those Namco plug-and-play consoles. Ever since, I haven't been happy. Yeah, this isn't a Nintendo game. It's a developed and published by Namco arcade joint. Well, I think we all at least know of Xevious. I mean, come on, we're all friends here. It's not a favorite for many of us, which makes sense as it turns out Xevious is beloved in Japan. Well, here it didn't see as much success. It was the first game they developed for the 3D Classics line. Japanese players and developers adore Xevious, and it's not difficult to see why. It's a solid arcade title. I just personally prefer the likes of Galaga. But even if players outside of Japan, i.e. the man myself, I, weren't too excited about Xevious itself, the idea of non-Nintendo games being eligible for this series gave me goosebumps. Hopping into 3D Classic Xevious, it retains the exact same menu setup as Excitebike, including the same main menu music. Literally all the options are the same across the whole series, so it's all about the game now. The 3D effect is so good, it made me deaf. Oh, that's Xevious. Was that the review in 1982? Just like Excitebike, this is in widescreen as well, though being a vertical shooter, there's not a ton you could do to make the game widescreen while also perfectly recreating it. Like, okay, if Xevious is in widescreen now, well, there's gonna be no enemies on the sides of the screen, and if you put enemies on the sides, this isn't my Xevious! So the developers put clouds on the sides to give the game widescreen, which is a brilliant solution. The 3D effect helps differentiate between what's next to you and below you. You have two different shots, one for enemies in the air and one for enemies on the ground. And as a dumb kid, i.e. 4 days ago, never really thought about how perspective really plays into Xevious. These things are below you and require you to drop a bomb on them. I just thought they were bullshit. Why isn't my main attack hitting them? Okay, I'll use this one for whatever reason. 3D Classic Xevious with the 3D on helps show specifically what obstacles are right in front of you and which ones are on the ground. And for a game all about firing the right weapon depending on the plane your enemy's on, yeah, I'll give in. This was a good choice for 3D Classics. Other than that, it's just Xevious. There's no real new additions. You can quick save high scores. There's not much else to it. So for $5.99, it's okay. When you're in the $6 territory, there's not a ton you can do to argue against its value. Where were you gonna spend those $6 on? Xevious? Oh, he's gotta budget things out. The next 3D Classics release came to Japan on July 13th and everywhere else on August 18th. That being 3D Classics, you gotta be fucking kidding me. Urban Champion is an old school black box NES game, meaning it saw Reagan. Excitebike was a black box game too, and it's actually older than Urban Champion, which gives Urban Champion less of an excuse. It's an early example of a fighting game. Nintendo's first to be exact. You just punch and punch and punch your opponent, and whoever gets punched into a manhole loses. Just like real life. Now this game is sort of the punching bag in Nintendo's early titles, generally considered one of their worst. I don't think it's that bad. I mean, I wouldn't willingly play it, but I'd so rather endure this than most of the NES black box sports titles. It's just so basic and simple and stupid and clunky and slow, and I think Nintendo knows this and re-releases it all the time as a joke. It got an arcade release, numerous virtual console releases, it can be played on a card, and it was the third 3D Classics title, which again, I'm positive they did this as a joke. I mean, Urban Champion just doesn't have anything warranting a 3D re-release. Like, what are you gonna do? Finally answer the question, oh, where is this building? Turns out 3D Classics Urban Champion is the most in-depth one so far. The title adds up. Deep in the settings, you can turn on a new camera mode where after every round, it shows us exactly what was going on 30 degrees to the left. And they pretty much recreated the entire game with 3D models. Why have we not stepped foot on Mars? Because we wasted our time doing shit like this. On top of that, multiplayer is included where you can connect to another 3DS nearby. You get new rank titles for enduring a certain number of rounds, which brings incentive to playing the game longer than a minute. Man, I played 3D Classics Urban Champion for 4 minutes. I was only expecting to play for 3. So they really went above and beyond with this version. Maybe they decided to remake Urban Champion to see how much they could improve a game that legitimately needed improvements. I think that should be done more often with remakes. Remake a game that actually needs remade. At the end of the day, however, the 3D Classics developers stick very close to the originals, improving things that need improving, but making the game at its core still feel the same, which is a great mantra to have, just not for Urban Champion. There really wasn't a ton you could do to this game to make it that much better without changing it completely. This is definitely the definitive version of the game, but for the amount of development time this probably took, was it worth it? Like I said, the developers might have decided on this game to see if they could improve it substantially, but I don't think they chose it for that reason. I think they chose it because they thought it'd be funny. It was only $5. They knew what they were doing. Next month, on August 10th in Japan and September 22nd elsewhere, the fourth title released, 3D Classics TwinBee. Who? TwinBee was an arcade vertical shooter by Konami, ported to the Famicom and various other Japanese computers in the mid-80s. It's barely had a presence here in the States, and it released under a different name, Rainbow Bell, in a Konami collection for the DS over here in 2007. But this 3D Classics version was the first time it released under its true title. That's awesome, but why? Why TwinBee? Out of all Konami games you could have remade via 3D Classics, why this one? TwinBee seems to be a similar story to Xevious. It feels like Nintendo has a lot of love for this game, as just like Xevious, they keep respecting the hell out of it. They respect TwinBee more than me as a person. It was re-released as a part of the Famicom mini-series of games on the Game Boy Advance in Japan, and also released as a game on the NES Nintendo Switch Online library. And also, just like Xevious, it's a vertical shooter where you have 2 weapons, one attacking enemies in front of you and one attacking enemies below you. So, okay, that makes sense why it would be chosen for the 3D treatment, but when you only have 6 games to do this with and you chose a game nobody's heard of that already had very similar gameplay to another game you already remade, with this being one of only 2 games in this lineup that Nintendo didn't develop, so they had to go out of their way to license out. I'll stop talking shit on TwinBee. Well, it's TwinBee, pretty much the same game as the Famicom version, which is also kind of strange. This was originally an arcade title, and when Xevious got the 3D Classics treatment, they used the arcade version, but with TwinBee, they didn't use the arcade version, they used the Famicom one. And on top of that, the game's not even in widescreen. They have this weird curtain border on the edges, when they could have done something like with Xevious and put clouds on the side or something. There are clouds in the game, after all. The 3D effect is fine. I mean, like with Xevious, the game uses dual planes, so it's totally logical. I just don't think it adds a ton to the experience. But TwinBee was a game that made sense to be converted to 3D, even if it didn't need it. The game's good, it's a fun retro shooter. They added rapid fire, which is nice, but overall, it's just an odd choice for the series. Similar to Urban Champion, this one was also only $5 compared to the $6 charged for Excitebike and Xevious. Honestly, I kinda like this one more than Xevious, but that game had more work put into the 3D conversion. At the end of the day, I wouldn't trust either one of these with my life. Well, it took a while, but we finally got a game with some meat on its bones later down the line on November 17th, everywhere other than Japan, which got the game much later on April 25th 2012. 3D Classics Kirby's Adventure. It's about time we got a game that wasn't just a simple high score type game, and Kirby's Adventure was an excellent pick as it was one of the biggest games for NES. But because of that, the title experienced a ton of technical issues on that platform, which is literally the only thing they really fixed in the 3D Classics version. This is just Kirby's Adventure, but it runs buttery smooth now. It's like I'm really there. The game is still in 4:3, which is disappointing. It's not a big deal, but when the first 3 games were given widescreen and now these don't, I feel gypped. The 3D effect is pretty minimal here as well. They kind of dim the background a bit, which you can turn on or off, but even at max 3D, it's just not that impressive. It's fine, it's not bad, it just adds nothing to the experience. I think they probably could have utilized the bottom screen more as well. The other titles just put random info on there, usually stats that would have taken up screen real estate. And Kirby's Adventure always had this big bar at the bottom showing the ability you have, the score, your life counter, and if Urban Champion could take all of its info and put it on the bottom screen, why can't Kirby? That's 0.1 for Urban Champion, going against Kirby's 1200. This is the best value out of the series so far though, being a game that actually has more than 30 minutes of content. And they could have done a lot more, but just the fact the game runs smoothly comparative to the NES version is enough to make this pretty definitive. Now, is it worth $2 more than the $5 Nintendo charged for the game on Wii and Wii U? This is just ridiculous, Nintendo. I was $2 short for my surgery money because of you. Next up is 3D Classics Kid Icarus. All right, we're finally doing some actual games. This released alongside Kid Icarus Uprising here in North America as a pre-order bonus on March 23rd, 2012 before releasing to the public on April 19th for $6. It released as a Club Nintendo reward in Japan on January 18th, in Europe on February 2nd, and Australia on April 12th. Yes, who else had 5 birthdays? 3D Classics Kid Icarus is based on the original Japanese Famicom disk system version, which you can tell by the music. The disk system featured different audio capabilities from that of the NES, so games like Kid Icarus, Metroid, Zelda 1 and 2, those have different soundtracks in Japan on the system. Not vastly different, but they do have a different quality to them. I think they used the Japanese version specifically because it featured saving capabilities. Over here, it was a password pack, which they were very proud of. Damn. Again, this isn't in widescreen, so the first 3 did, the last 3 didn't. Instead, we get this sort of tacky border. I wish the 4:3 games gave you the option to change it or turn it off at the very least. The 3D effect is similar to Kirby's. It's not game-changing, but it's much more robust than that game. I feel like there's a lot more going on here, and there's more going on with the features too. You can play with the original controls, but the 3D Classics control option features a ton of quality of life improvements. Just better overall. Jumping and shooting is better, timing's adjusted, speed's adjusted. It's not a whole different game, it just feels smoother now. But the biggest addition is the color and backgrounds. This version includes backdrops, and they look gorgeous. The original Kid Icarus, much like various other NES games, had plain black backgrounds, which made each stage feel the exact same. I remember when they added Skyward the Smash Bros. Brawl as a stage, I thought, this looks nothing like Kid Icarus, it looks good! These backgrounds help you distinguish not only where you are in the game level-wise, but also the story. Now it's like, yeah, no shit, I'm in the Underworld. With the backgrounds and new control options, the save feature new to Ohioans, this is my favorite way to play the original Kid Icarus. The original has its charm, but it's not too fun to go back to today. This one helps me to appreciate the game so much more, and they didn't even change a ton. They just tweaked elements that really needed it. Because I think even the most die-hard Kid Icarus fans won't admit the first game was perfect. You're gonna have mega fans say how if you're not playing the original, you're just not playing Kid Icarus. You truly haven't lived until you've been shot in the face. But you can play this game just like the original if you want to. The new control options just made it a more fluid and fun experience. If the challenge from the NES game came from how slow and clunky the game controlled at times, you beating it doesn't mean you're the gaming messiah. It kinda just means you had more free time to beat the game. And with that, the 3D Classics line wrapped up. What a disgusting family photo. Okay, so I followed these games extensively as they were releasing. I bought Urban Champion on release day, and I still haven't made my money back on that investment. 3D Classics Excitebike was the first game I ever downloaded on my 3DS, and I bought it for $6 3 weeks after it was made available for free. I got Xevious and Kirby's Adventure shortly after. The 3D Classics as a concept was something I think everybody could get behind. 8-bit remasters in 3D. They were still the same games at their core, but enhanced in multiple ways while retaining the same visuals, music. It was amazing. They just picked the worst games to do it with. The developers commented on how difficult developing these titles were. They probably thought this would be easy peasy going into it, and then 2 years later they said, voila, Xevious. Now, I don't doubt these games took a lot of effort to make. They didn't emulate anything. These games were remade and enhanced in more ways than one. You can truly see how skilled and hardworking developers were in not only remaking these games for the better, but retaining the feel of their original releases. That's not as easy to do as it sounds. And I'm sure, judging by the amount of 3D games they had as demos at E3 2010, they had far more plans for this series, but cut it after the 6 because they just took too long to make. Plus, they didn't sell as well as they wanted, and I totally understand that. You don't want to put all that work into something and won't make money back. But that just makes me ask why they chose Urban fucking Champion. 4 of these games were very simple, high score based titles. Most of them were good, but why didn't they do more titles like Kirby's Adventure or Kid Icarus? Why not Zelda 1 with the top-down perspective? That would have worked perfectly. Even something like Super Mario Bros. 3 with the whole stage play aesthetic would be highlighted that much more with the 3D effect showing depth with the shadows. What, Mock Rider, if they wanted to stick to simpler games? That would have been good. Why not Game Boy games or Super Nintendo games or just different third-party ones other than 2 vertical shooters which weren't that popular to begin with and honestly have a bit too much in common? I'm sure it 100% came down to these titles being the first they tried out because they were simpler at the end of the day. And if the series was a success, they would move on to more popular titles like Mario and Zelda games. But how would the series be a success when these were the games you were depending on? All these games are on systems that Nintendo was already releasing games for on the 3DS through the Virtual Console. And putting out Super Mario Bros. For $5 on the 3DS with little to no effort involved probably still made Nintendo 10 times more money than remaking Excitebike in 3D for only $1 more. How 3D Classic Urban Champion was the same price as most unaltered NES games on the 3DS eShop. It was the same price they charged for Urban Champion on Wii and Wii U with no changes or improvements. No wonder they canceled this series. We're gonna put more effort into this re-release, but charge the exact same price as we always did, or $1 more. I personally was hoping to see a sister series on Wii U called HD Classics, where it's the same idea, but 8 and 16-bit games would be remastered in HD, but I can always write to Nintendo about that later. Well, that's not the complete end to the story. Where Nintendo left off, Sega picked up with their own lineup of 3D remasters, the Sega 3D Classics, kicking off in Japan on December 26, 2012. These aren't a part of the same series, but I guess the term 3D Classics can be used by anybody. Compared to Nintendo's 6 game output, Sega released 27 of them. They know something we don't. So this is what I think happened. Arika is a fantastic studio. They've made some phenomenal games. They're not a porting house. You give the Teddy Together guys Excitebike, it's gonna take them a while to figure out. They did a superb job, but I feel like they weren't as efficient as they could have been through development considering this was relatively new territory for them. Sega's 3D Classics were developed by M2. This is their thing. They almost exclusively work with re-releases and consistently are contracted by Sega for this kind of stuff. And their 3D Classics have a lot of the same bells and whistles as Arika's, so I think this kind of explains why there were only 6 Nintendo games. Because my god, these are packed with features! You can adjust so much, including whether or not the 3D pops out or falls in, the screen looking more like a classic CRT, what system you want the games to be running on, since there were extremely minor differences between playing Sonic on different models of the Genesis. Some games go further than others. Some are in widescreen and others are just in 4:3. Some have touchscreen control for more precise movement like Power Drift or Galaxy Force 2, and others, even if they are pretty basic like Puyo Puyo 2, Streets of Rage, or Sonic 1 and 2, they're at the very least really good versions that run great and look fantastic. However, Sonic 1 and 2 not being in widescreen, like come on man, the mobile phone versions were, why not these ones? If Fantasy Zone can be in widescreen, I don't understand why Streets of Rage can't be, and that mentality I have with pretty much all of these 3D re-releases by Sega or Nintendo. I am very curious as to why some games got widescreen and others didn't. There were so many Sega 3D Classics that released. Some of them were exclusive to Japan, some of them were exclusive to the physical collections they put out. The first one was the only one to come out here, Sega 3D Classics Collection, and it's so well done and full of life. I'd say this is one time where Sega easily ousted Nintendo. Their 3D Classics were from all kinds of different systems, arcade, Master System, Genesis, the SG-1000. They put out loads of them, and they were mostly games people actually wanted to play. Nintendo did a couple of good ones, but mainly sat in their own piss asking why nobody wanted to play with them. Yeah, these are all great re-releases. I just wish they did more of them. Specifically Nintendo. I think if Sega did more, they'd pass out. They just chose the wrong games to do this line with. I'm happy they did what they did. I mean, these are all the definitive versions of each game. But why TwinBee? Why Urban Champion? I'm sick of living in the dark about this. I'm gonna go into the credits and find who to harass. I'll give Arika this, they're hard to threaten.